But let's just jump in and get started with our program today. We really are going to focus on the 20th century in Sioux City. So that decade of the 1900s is what we're going to be looking at. So in the early 1900s, there was basically a whole progressive movement. And this was social and cultural, and a lot of things were happening, a lot of changes were happening. And out of that, we have what's called the New Woman, and this is kind of an American phenomena. And the icon of the New Woman is the Gibson girl. And you'll see in this show, we're just focusing on the Gibson girl in terms of her athletic endeavors. But the artist, Charles Dana Gibson, he started drawing and painting American women, and he kind of used them as the muse for this new philosophy about what women would be. And he generally drew women that were really tall. I guess you'd almost say kind of model-esque, kind of tall and thin, and the big upswept hair, so you'll see these images. And then they were doing lots of new things, and one of those things was athletics. And they kind of became the standard for beauty of that time period. So again, we get to see the golfing, biking, golfing, all kinds of different things. And with the influence of the Gibson girl, it all of a sudden becomes more acceptable to engage in athletic pursuits. Not all athletic pursuits, but some. Tennis, golf, biking, swimming, those are right up there at the top. And, this is social acceptance for athletics for women of means, I would say. Wealthy women were the people who had access to these kinds of pursuits. When you all of a sudden start adopting an active lifestyle, your clothing has to change. So we see, this is not a dress, this is a shirtwaist, it's a shirt and a skirt. And you don't necessarily have to wear a corset with these clothes. So this is, active wear of the early 1900s. And here in Sioux City, we absolutely felt the effects of that movement. Now, this image on the left of the roller skating, this is earlier. This is like late 1800s. So roller skating was acceptable as kind of a family activity or an activity for women as well. But over there on your right, that is Grace Toy is her maiden name. You might have heard of the Toy Mansion. She became Mrs. John W. Van Dyke, but that is Grace Toy. And in this article, she's listed as the head of the athletic girls. We'll talk about who those girls were. And they have recently adopted roller skating. And Grace and several other young women at the Sioux City Boat Club. This is circa 1905 that these two images were taken. They started a club, basically. And their club was, some of the progressive young ladies of Sioux City have organized an athletic association, which is to meet Tuesday morning at Riverside for pleasure and benefit. The time is to be spent in bowling, rowing, tennis, and other sports which tend to give hardiness to the muscle and color to the cheek. And that is exactly what they did. So you can see them boating here. And then I put this image on the left because you can see the outfits, the clothing's changed, right? They're not wearing dresses. They're wearing the shirt waist. And then even, there's kind of a nod to menswear. You can see they've got ties on. And then the big kind of upswept hair. The boating club outfits weren't as great, but. And then this image is from 1916, but it's still the same women, and they're still doing the same stuff. This is 10 years later, and the article on the left is describing the tennis tournament that they were having, kind of the internal tournament at the club, and then they were going to spar with the Lamar's Club. But then the images are all, Mrs. Hammer, Mrs. John Van Dyke. They're all there doing these different activities. And again, we just kind of pull back to that Gibson girl. This is another image of the Gibson girl that was done in the early 1900s. But you can see, like, his drawings were all they're kind of showing this very lengthy woman, even to the point of the upswept hair and then the tall hat. But I love that, this is the 1920s, so they've got the little cloche hats on that women were starting to wear at the time. The fashion has changed, but they're doing the exact thing that, the Gibson girl as the icon was doing. It was becoming more socially acceptable for women to be out there doing these activities. All right, we might talk about these Young Women's Athletic Association down the road a little bit. We're going to take a little sidebar here, and we're going to talk about something else that was happening in the early 1900s, and that's basketball. So we all know James Naismith there on the left. He invented basketball in December of 1891. He was trying to come up with an activity for a bunch of guys that were kind of rowdy, and they really needed to, it was winter, what do you do? So he came up with this game with the peach pits, and that's basketball. And right away, women were starting to play. So that was 1891. And the next to Naismith, and they worked together in some ways, is Cinda Berenson, and she was at Smith College in Massachusetts. And in 1893, she started her girls at her college playing women's basketball. And she kind of reorganized the sport according to different rules. So that was when we first have, at that point it was a 3-court game, and I'll show you a diagram of that in a little bit. So that 3-court game, they weren't playing men's rules, they were playing different rules that we'll talk about in a little bit. But this is 1896, the Smith College team they already have a women's basketball team. And at this time, some areas were playing so-called men's rules, and some areas were playing women's rules. There was a whole set of rules in the South that involved actually like multiple courts, like 10 courts. The court was divided into 10 areas, and it was all, we wouldn't want to over-activate ourselves. We don't want to be too physical. From this time forward, the basketball court becomes really a place where women's issues play out, where women's rights, where women's issues play out. And one of the most important group of people in terms of these rights were female educators, like, physical education, people who were women. They weren't always on the side that, looking back, we would necessarily think they were going to be on. So that's been kind of interesting too. Basketball comes to Morningside at this time. And so 1902, they have a basketball team. I think there's a quote up there. The ladies basketball team, a new organization, proved beyond a doubt that Morningside College girls were as active physically as mentally. A number of teams were played with visiting teams. This is from the annual. The Morningside Annual. A blushing maiden full of life to her very fingertips is one of God's greatest gifts to humanity. Basketball ensures health and longevity. So we've got the 1902 team here. There's a 1903 team listed from the next year's annual, but something happened in 1902, and that is that interscholastic, so, basically rivalries between schools was banned at Morningside in 1902, because in 1902 the women won a tournament, and then they were featured in a Chicago newspaper, and Methodist women across the Midwest were so appalled and they wrote to this, you got in touch with the school, that the school canceled interscholastic play for years. And I honestly don't know what date it started again, but they did not get to play other schools for years and years. And so that's kind of referred to here in 1905. Now, they did have a basketball team, but I'm not really sure who they were playing each other. And then this is kind of the state of girls' athletics at Morningside then for the next few years. We've got things like, they're doing the little dumbbells. They've got sticks, a little dancing. Not like basketball. Not as fun as basketball. They start to have intramural play at Morningside, where the freshmen play the sophomores and so forth. And these games became so heated and popular that the boys were causing a lot of trouble. And so they weren't allowed in to watch the games. And then they busted in to watch the games. So then they banned them. Then they completely banned male spectators from these games. And I do think, so we'll talk about this as we get a little farther in, but in the rest of the state, there was more basketball being played, especially the small schools were playing girls' basketball. And so these boys, the girls were used to playing with spectators. If you came from a small school, you were used to playing with spectators. If you were a boy from a small school, you were used to watching girls play basketball. So I'm sure there was, a sense that why not? But anyway, it was banned. Later on, they had, it's interesting because they actually had a very strong emphasis at Morningside College of women's sports, but it was all intramural. But I would say it was definitely accepted as an important part of a women's education to be very physically active, and they played all the sports, but in an intramural area. So just to cover, maybe for those of people who haven't seen the way six-player basketball is played. So on the left, this is Senda Barrison's version of basketball. So there were actually 3 courts. The center here, you didn't cross over your line. I mean, you stayed in the court that you were in, but each team had 2 centers who were the people who basically got the ball from one court to the other court. And then in 6-player basketball, so a team would have, so the white team in this image, they would have these players on this side were their offensive players. The white players over here are the defensive players. So the white team's got 6 players. 3 of them only play offense. 3 of them only play defense. Same thing here. In this picture, the dark jersey is on offense, and their defensive players are just waiting up there. So, 6-player basketball, we spend a lot of time doing this. Just waiting. When's it going to be my turn? Just wait until the ball's on your court. Any questions about 6-player basketball, how it worked? 2 dribbles. This version, they had 3 dribbles, no steals. You could not touch the ball. You really, really couldn't touch the ball if your opposing player had the ball. Ostensibly, you could reach in and grab it on a bounce, but I would say the officiating was very, very tight. They did not, if you weren't in the lane, it was very hard to block a shot because they were so tight on, you couldn't touch the ball until it had completely left the opposing player's hands. So take it from a girl who fouled out many, many games. They were very tight on the calls. And so you could steal the ball in the zone, right here in this area, okay? And so when I was doing research for this program, I was kind of, it gets personal to you. I was kind of miffed because these girls at the boat club were getting to do all this fun stuff. And I thought, what is happening with the rest of the Sioux City girls? What are they getting to play? And I'm sure there were some pickup games in the neighborhoods. But then when I saw, as early as 1906, the YWCA in Sioux City was playing basketball, I mean, I was like really excited. It's the same girls. They just took up basketball. So I'll just read you some of their names. Some of them might be familiar to you. So they had two teams that were playing each other. And these were basically all girls from that association I told you about earlier. But the athletes here, this is Miss Genevieve Pendleton. She married Ding Darling. Okay. Mrs. O.J. Hammer, Mrs. Stewart Brown, Mrs. Will Wells, Mrs. John Van Dyke, that's our Grace Toy here. Miss Luella Fessenden is the physical director. And then the Kappas, and they won the only game that I saw the record of. Fessenden is at the top, the athletic director, and then the upper row coming down. Miss Grace Richardson, Miss Anna McGuire. The middle is Miss Schroeder, Dr. Mary Bawden, and then the lower, Miss Ethel Gant and Miss Imogene Chapman. So, yeah, there are our earliest basketball players as well. These must have been some really, really physically active ladies. It would have been interesting to know more about their later years if they continued to be so physically active. But there were some girls' games and leagues going on in the early, in the 1910s here in Sioux City, so there's talk about the Longfellow and Cooper playing, church leagues. So there's a few games, but it's not really organized by the school, and you could be in a league somewhere. But I would guess that there were not very many girls playing in these games. Here's another early team. So this is the Advanced Business Girls of the YWCA, and this was on the occasion of an exhibition at the gym. Featured entertainment that evening was an Indian club drill, an Irish lilt and Highland fling dancing, and then a basketball game. So if we're following a timeline here, you could say we're in the 1920s here. Naismith comes back in, and I found it very curious. At this time, he says these rules where we're separating the courts, confining offensive and defensive players only to one side, he said they're psychologically wrong, and that the players should be allowed to change sides, basically meaning it's just, you shouldn't only get to play defense. You should play offense as well. That makes it more fair. It's better for the player. That's kind of the point of the whole endeavor, is to have a well-rounded experience. So I found it was interesting that he came out and said that, but no, that did not change. And then this is an image of a team from the 1920s here in Sioux City, and they were playing in the Commerce Building, not exactly sure why. Remember, the small schools are playing a lot of basketball. And in Iowa, this continues to be the trend, and I don't know, there's this whole kind of mythic sense of the farm girl being so pure and wholesome and physically active, and so those girls, I mean, if that played into it, I'm not really sure, but they were playing. And you can see there were some really good teams here in Northwest Iowa. I love some of these articles that I found. So this Ida Grove team, there was a little article about their wins, and willing to play any girls team in the state. That's how much they wanted to play, and how good they felt they were. Same for the Lake Park girls, winning to defend their claim with any contender. So, there's maybe 8 or 9 games a year they're playing. I mean, any travel team might play 50 games a year in this day and age, so that would not be a lot of basketball. we're going to take a sidebar and we're going to talk about some other sports in Sioux City before coming back to the basketball story. And Mary Trelia, you've probably heard of Mary Trelia. The Mary J. Trelia Community House is really an icon in Sioux City. It's been around for over 100 years, named after her. Before she became Mary Trelia of the Community House, she was a very talented athlete. So she was born in the late 1800s. Her parents had a business just north of downtown, a little deli. She worked there. And she started playing baseball. And she became really good. She joined a traveling baseball team. There were teams that were called Bloomer Girls, but there were multiple teams all around the country. And she was on one of these Bloomer teams. And so they would travel around and play men's teams. And then when she was kind of done with that career, when she came back to Sioux City, one of the things, she would be hired to umpire men's games. So it was kind of a one more draw to come see the girl umpire. And evidently she had a strong Italian accent, because that was part of the play. It's like when she would yell strike and out, she had a kind of a lilt to how she made her calls. We had some great golfers from Sioux City. So on the left is Jenny Jones, and she won probably what was the first Iowa women's amateur championship in 1913. They didn't really have one every single year, but they were holding one again in 1916. But by the time she was killed in a car accident at a very young age, so she didn't even get to defend her title, but she was a very talented golfer. And then Judy Kimball, also in the I think it was 1958, she was Iowa Amateur Championship. She won that 4 straight years. She went to the University of Kansas and played, and then she joined the LPGA Tour in 1961, and she was on the tour for 18 years. So she was very successful. She had her own set of golf clubs as well. So that was Jenny Jones and Judy Kimball. We had some amateur golfers here in Sioux City. A very fun group of ladies I would have loved to know. They had the Pajama Club. And not a lot is known about this, but there was an article about the Pajama Club. This is 1931. And so in this time period, there really is not a lot of like leisure wear or athletic wear that women would have to go out and play different sports. And so the one rule I could see for the Pajama Club was that they had to come and golf in their pajamas, which at first sounds pretty silly, and I think it was a fun group. But the pajamas started to be worn a little bit outside of the house at this time, and maybe this is one of the ways. And we see it more in Hollywood, where they were wearing almost like what we'd call like harem pants out when they would come out of swimming or something. But these types of clothes. So these are what I could find. This is a set of vintage kitchen pajamas. Kitchen pajamas was what they were wearing, and this is a pattern for kitchen pajamas. So if you ever see some kitchen pajamas, I'd love to know exactly what they look like. So during this era, we do have, there's some opportunity for athletics, intramural sports at school. I'm sure this is like a field day. Tennis, golf, swimming was a pretty big deal in Sioux City as well. But let's dive back into Iowa girls basketball and kind of set the stage for what happens in Sioux City. So the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Association was created in 1925, and that's when it all really starts. And by 1926, there are 159 schools with teams. In the 1940s, 70% of the teams were in schools with less than 100 students. So you see the trend, right? It's the small schools that have basketball. By the 1950s, so 70% of Iowa high school girls were playing basketball. That's an amazing statistic. By 1971, 20% of the high school female athletes were from Iowa. Okay, so this basketball phenomenon was mostly unique to Iowa. That's why if almost all the girls are playing in Iowa, they're basically composing almost all of the girls in the country that are getting to play sports. So as much as it was limited in Iowa to 6-player, to maybe rural areas, they were really involved. However, it was a male-dominated sport at the coaching level and at the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Association. So only 1.5% of Iowa basketball coaches were women. Now in 1984-85, and we're going to talk about why this happened, that's when schools could choose to be a 5-player team or a 6-player team. And then in 1999, one woman was on the board. And this was like a 20-person board of the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Association. The IGHSAU was limited to administrators, so yes, there weren't that many female administrators in the state of Iowa, but there were some. I mean, there certainly were in Sioux City. This annual, we have a copy of it up here at the table. You might want to come take a look. It was a big deal, right? Do you remember these? So this was the basketball yearbook, about the state basketball tournament, but other sports were listed in there. But the idea that the Iowa girls basketball was queen, yeah, it was queen. And it was a juggernaut. Financially, it paid for all the rest of the sports. We wouldn't have had softball and golf and tennis, except that the girls' basketball paid for it because the tournament was so popular. We're going to talk more about that. But you might want to take a look at that. And I tell you, your mother would have been astonished at some of the uniforms in the 1958 girls' yearbook. They were like crop tops and skirts. And they were pretty amazing, beautiful uniforms. I'm kind of a uniform person. I mean, I get into it. You'll see we have a couple of slides about that later. But I mean, like fabulous uniforms, but the crop top is like, wow. So this is Wayne E. Cooley. Have you heard of him? Yeah. So he was the administrator for the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Association from 1954 until 2002. And so both of these articles are from 1974. Now, think about what's happening in 1974. By the way, by this time, 500 plus schools in Iowa have girls basketball teams. So that's incredible, right? It's an incredible achievement. However, Title IX has passed, and there is a push nationwide in colleges to add sports, and basketball is one that they add, and nationwide in schools to add women's sports, and they're going to add basketball. But they're not adding 6-player basketball. They're adding 5-player basketball. And then if we think about, and I just want to say about Wayne E. Cooley, like it was a kind of a household name when I was growing up. We talked about him a lot. And I made the mistake of talking about him to the other girls on my team once. I was not happy with the administration, I guess I would say, because I wanted to play 5-player and felt like we weren't allowed to. And I remember explaining this all to the girls in the van once on the way to a track meet, and my coach was in the front, and I used a bad word, which I shouldn't have done in 1987. And I'm pretty sure I ran extra laps because he was a revered figure, you know. So what's happening in Sioux City in, say, 1970? I mean, remember, we have the 4 high schools. Okay, we've got Central, Riverside, East High School, and Leeds. So Sioux City at this point where all of a sudden a lot of opportunity is going to come up and a lot of push for girls' sports is going to be on the horizon. They're in the midst of having these major changes to their high schools anyway. So the pushback I see in Sioux City schools to adding women's sports and is really financial, and it's a lot about that we have all this other stuff going on. So there's some legitimate concern from those angles. At these schools, there are other activities available. But like I read this, so this is from, on the left, her name's Henrietta Williams. This is from Central. And she says, known for her energy, enthusiasm, starred in basketball, volleyball, track, and gymnastic intramurals. I mean, great, but you're not getting the full opportunity if you're starring in the intramurals. And then at Leeds, cheerleading would be available. Cheerleading would be available in the other schools. Here's the East High intramurals girls. So I'm sure these girls would get the opportunity to play a wide variety of sports on an intramural level. This is 1968. So going forward, a lot of the information we have here is from the annuals. And so we don't have all the annuals, or sometimes particularly some sports like the spring sports get left out of the annuals. So there's some things that we just don't have. But yes, the Sioux City schools start to add sports at this time. The first ones they add are golf and tennis. And then they add gymnastics. I would say, and gymnastics, especially in the annuals, is kind of listed as more of a performance than a sport. And I couldn't find, except it took 3 or 4 years before I could find they were scoring gymnastics. So, that's, at the time, that was a little different. And then I like the article here. So a lot of what we learn about is from newspaper articles, and it's just interesting. The newspaper reporters, the journalists, we had really obviously great columnists at the Sioux City Journal who were covering women's sports. And so some of the articles are, they're kind of cheesy. I mean, they're really kind of making fun of the girls. But at the same time, I think you have to remember where they were coming from. But he goes out, and this is Ron Malchoy, and he goes out and golfs with the East High golf team, and they just smoke him. And so that was kind of the point of the article. He was really giving them a lot of credit. But the names here will come back. So we have Nancy Popkin Nan Popkin is over here on the right, and she is, right? We know Nan Popkin, yeah. We got some basketball players there in the back. Gymnastics, again, as I mentioned, is available, but it is more of a performance. And then Title IX. Okay, so Title IX is a law. I'm not a lawyer. We're not going to spend a bunch of time talking about Title IX, other than to say it was interesting. I never once read any article or report that refers to Title IX as Sioux City is trying to talk about adding women's sports. They're not saying, well, we have to do this because of Title IX. So it's a lot of things converging at once. I mean, Billie Jean King's big tennis match was 1973. There's a lot of movement towards this, and a lot of people who just generally want these activities to be available for women. This law, by the way, was bipartisan. It was widely supported, eagerly signed into law. Heaton has the first girls basketball team, 1971, 1972. So the coach, I think it was John Adams, yep, right here. And then the editorial is actually from 1984, and that's the first year that they went to state. And it kind of says, isn't it fitting that Heaton's going to state? They were the first team in the metro area to have women's basketball. They add swimming and track in 1972-73, so these would be the first years at the new high schools. And I think, kind of going back to what, you were saying with your mother, the opposition to basketball, there was a sense that, okay, you could do swimming and track because that's not directly, yeah, they're very physical, but is it the same kind of physical activity and opposition that you're going to have if you're playing basketball with somebody? No, it's essentially an individual sport. But I would add, look at the numbers. First year, look at all those girls that went out to play. And then, of course, the first year or two, they break every record that they've made because they got better. And again, like I said, I kind of like uniforms. I mean, when I grew up, my school, every sport we had was the girls had old uniforms, which was fine, except then one year we got new uniforms, and it was exciting. But they all had new uniforms, right? Because they had brand new sports. But I do think they were really nice. And then in 1973 in the spring, you start to get the push for let's add girls basketball. And West High, over here in this article, they had a petition among the students, and they got a couple hundred signatures. And then they finally approved girls basketball. It's a big deal. I like this. Speaking in favor of adoption were James Remby, which might be a name we'll hear again in a minute. And then this Mrs. Jacqueline Tronson, who said she made the request 25 years ago at the age of 16. So here we go. Our first season at East, North, and West. And we've got there on the left the East High basketball team. We have do we have 3 girls from the East High basketball team? Just 2. 2 girls. Okay, all right. But we do have a couple of girls from this, and would like you to tell your story at the end a little bit about kind of getting to play on that team as a freshman. But Nancy Popkin, who we saw as the really good golfer, she was the leading point scorer that year. Sandy Remby and Debbie Remby, who's, I would guess that was their father's, yeah. And then I just would like to point out, it kind of lists the stats here. Julie Petronas had 149 rebounds. The closest was 57. Julie, would you let somebody rebound the ball? No. But then this is Rita Dupree from West as well. So, yeah, there she is, dominating the net, I would say. A couple of years later, North had kind of a cover girl. Cindy C. Was on the cover of that, basically the slick magazine for girls basketball, and that's Cindy number 10 there in the jump. There was a cute article that I read about Cindy. So she was notified in the morning that she was going to be on the cover, or she read it in the paper. I think that was it. She read in the paper that she was going to be on the cover. And the Athletic Association spent the whole day trying to call her. And they finally got her that night, and she said, "Oh, Mom and I've been shopping." I mean, I think it was a big deal to be on the cover because you had to go down and go to special events. Like she was the guest of honor at an event with the governor. So, yeah. And then other sports get added down the way. So golf and softball and volleyball get added in 1978. This is my friend Linda Christensen. In her first year at North High, they went to state. So that's pretty exciting. And then in 1980 and 1981, cross country gets added. And then in 1984, we're still a big story. But the big story in 1984, and this is in all of Iowa, the big story is 5-player or 6-player. So this was the biggest sports story of the year. And do we recognize who this is? Okay, this is a judge from Sioux City, Donald O'Brien, and he was in Des Moines at that time. So in 1984, in March, So it kind of like now, how we're very excited in March about girls basketball. I mean, that was the flavor of the time. This court case was being heard in March, and two girls sued to be able to play 5-player basketball. The athletic union asks them to dismiss the case, and the girls say they are being discriminated against. The point here is basically they can't play the 5-player game, so they're losing out on college athletic scholarships. Okay? O'Brien at some point asks for more arguments about this, and the girls' athletic union, I think they probably see maybe the writing on the wall. They don't like the way the case is going. So then that summer they come out and say, you get to choose. Schools get to choose. So that was a very surprising move, that people thought they would kind of go to the wall on this, but they said it's up to the schools. And so then all of a sudden we all have this question very late in the game. I mean, the season starts in November. We're talking in October. What are we going to do? Are we going to play 5-player basketball or 6-player basketball? And at this point, too, think about it becomes, who will you be playing? So if nobody in your conference wants to switch, you really can't switch. But if everybody in your conference is switching, you kind of have to switch. So it's kind of this waterfall effect. I will say in this article, Terry Hersom says, why are we switching? There's only one reason: embarrassment. Because at this point, Iowa is along with Oklahoma, only one of 2 states that's still playing the 6-player game. Okay, and then this is Jim Duncan, who was the voice of Iowa girls basketball tournament and the Drake relays, and he says, but why should we switch? Essentially, the college level players so many of them are from Iowa. Why should we switch? They're so successful. Well, yeah, the forwards, but not the guards. And even like college basketball coaches are on the record as saying, we love to recruit from Iowa, but never a guard. Guards don't get recruited because you had the 2 bounce limit and no shooting, opportunities. And yeah, were Iowa girls playing more college basketball than Iowa boys? Yes, but that's again because basketball as a whole had not been played in the country as much as it had been played in Iowa. We just had that record here. And so there were lots of opinions back and forth. What should we do? Full court, half court? They call the 5-player basketball a slow-moving, dull game. Yeah. Yeah. We beg to differ. Things have changed. So at this point in Sioux City, there's the athletic council, because of kind of a committee, meets, and they recommend that Sioux City go to 5-player. It goes to the school board, and the school board says no. We don't want to go to 5-player, and there were a variety of reasons, but they said no. And then very quickly, this article comes out. I mean, there must have been kind of a flurry of engagement then at that point where girls are saying, and a lot of adults are saying, we missed this meeting. Guess what? There was a public meeting. Nobody knew about it. And we want it. We want to play 5-player. So they vote again. A couple weeks later, they vote again, and they do go to 5-player. And so then we have Hersom saying, hey, this is inevitable. It's going to happen. And particularly because the conference here starts to change. A couple of schools start to go to 5-player, so then they go to 5-player too. But I do like this. So this is, I think, the coach at West, Hansen. Heck, we don't have any fans now. What's going to happen when we make the change? Oh, at first maybe people will come to watch. Once they've had a little, I don't know. So basically they're like, well, who's going to come and watch? Well, yeah. I mean, we are watching women play basketball. Yeah. Yeah. So that was the year 1984, 1985. They go to in Sioux City. They go to full court. Now, like the whole state goes to full court in 1992. So it was, once there was that initial group of schools that went, then it was kind of a lull for a while that people didn't go. So like always played 6-player basketball. Sioux City, they were playing 5-player in 1984. We're going to wrap up in a minute. I just want to point out a few of our really standout athletes, and not going to hit all of them, but I just wanted to show you a few. Mary Schrad from Heelan, so she was one of those very early basketball players, grew up in Carroll, to Heelan and finished her high school career, went to Briarcliff, and then she was a member of a professional basketball team. There was a professional women's basketball in like 1970, I think 5 through 8, 3 years of it. And she was on the Iowa Cornets. So a great basketball player and leader for Iowa. Yvette Greer was an incredible standout track athlete from West and went to USD, 3-time NCAA Division II national champion. She won the one state 100-meter and 200-meter hurdles. Val Yukon from West was a standout basketball player in particular. Do you guys know Val? She's here at the museum all the time. Whoops. Just a few others. Kate Gordon won the 100-meter dash 3 years in a row. Jackie Kalin was a standout 400-meter hurdlist and then played professional basketball. She was from North and then eventually played professional basketball for the Israel national team, but she played her collegiate years at the University of Iowa. And then, I think probably one of our most decorated athletes from Sioux City, female athletes, was Shelby Houlihan. And here she is, this is high school, where she was anchoring the sprint medley relay, distance medley relay, but a star at Drake, and then ASU, and then at the Olympics as well. She is currently under a 4-year ban from the whatever governing body it is that governs track and field, but I think that lifts this year. Okay, so I would expect that we will see more from her.